Bismillah. There is a sentence many people quietly carry into the future with them, especially when they think about tomorrow, about next year, about 2026. It is not always spoken out loud, but it lives deep in the heart. You are not able to heal, not able to change, not able to become more than your past. This sentence doesn't arrive as a shout, it arrives as a whisper, repeating itself every time you try to move forward. And over time, that whisper begins to feel like truth. But what if the problem was never your ability? What if the real struggle was that you began measuring yourself only by what you see, by what failed before, by what broke you once? When fear becomes your lens, the future looks closed, heavy, unreachable, yet the soul was never created to be confined by fear, nor was your worth designed to be determined by your weakest moments. As we stand on the edge of what feels like an uncertain future, the question is not whether 2026 will test you. It will. The real question is whether you will continue to believe the lie that you are incapable, or whether you will finally unlearn it. Because the moment you challenge that belief, everything begins to shift, not outside of you, but within you. You are not able. These words do not usually arrive loudly. They do not knock on the door of your heart and announce themselves. They slip in quietly, often wearing the disguise of realism, of caution, of wisdom earned through pain. They tell you they are protecting you. They say, be careful. You've tried before. You know how this ends. And because they sound reasonable, because they echo experiences you remember all too well, you begin to listen. Over time, those words stop feeling like a suggestion and start feeling like an identity. You are not able becomes who you think you are. This belief does not begin in the future. It is born in the past. It is shaped in moments when you reached for something sincere and your hand came back empty. It forms when prayers felt unanswered, when effort did not lead to relief, when hope felt expensive and disappointment felt guaranteed. Slowly, the heart learns a defense mechanism. Don't hope too much. Don't dream too far. Don't trust what hasn't proven itself safe. And so, when you think about 2026, you don't see possibility. You see repetition. You see the same cycles, the same struggles, the same you. The future becomes a mirror of what already hurt you. But the danger of this belief is not that it predicts failure. The danger is that it shrinks your understanding of who you are. You begin to define yourself by your lowest moments, by what you couldn't carry, by what overwhelmed you. You forget that limitation is not the same as incapability. You forget that being tired is not the same as being weak. You forget that falling short does not mean you were never meant to walk the path at all. Yet the heart, once convinced it is unable, stops standing up when it falls. It starts calling surrender maturity. There is something deeply painful about believing you are not able because it quietly removes responsibility without removing pain. You are still hurting, still yearning, still longing for change, but you excuse yourself from trying by calling it acceptance. And the soul knows the difference. The soul knows when it is resting versus when it is hiding. The soul knows when patience has turned into fear, wearing the language of wisdom. When you look toward 2026 with this belief, you are not really looking at the year ahead. You are looking at yourself through the lens of your wounds. You are asking the future to behave better than the past while refusing to believe you can show up differently within it. And this is where the contradiction lives. Because the same heart that says, I am not able, is the heart that still wants peace, still wants healing, still wants purpose. You want the outcome without believing in the process. Because believing in the process requires believing in your own growth. What if the question is not whether you are able, but whether you are willing to stop carrying a false image of yourself? What if you have been loyal to a story that was never meant to define you? The story that says you always fail, you always fall apart, you never finish what you start. That story feels familiar, but familiarity does not make it true. It only makes it comfortable, and comfort, when rooted in fear, becomes a cage you decorate and call home. There is a subtle arrogance hidden in the belief that your past determines your future completely. It assumes that growth is impossible, that learning does not occur through pain, that transformation is reserved for others. Yet every time you survived something you thought would destroy you, that belief was already challenged. Every time you adapted, endured, or kept going despite emptiness, the narrative cracked. You did not become unbroken, but you became proof that you are more complex than your worst days. You are not able often translates to, I am afraid of hoping again. Because hope asks you to be vulnerable before there is evidence. Hope asks you to open your hands before you know what they will hold. And if you have been disappointed deeply, the heart tries to protect itself by shutting down its reach. But protection that costs you growth is not protection at all. It is a slow erasure of your own potential. As 2026 approaches in your mind, notice what you fear more, failure or effort. Because sometimes the belief that you are not able is not about inability, but about exhaustion. You are tired of carrying expectations, tired of trying to control outcomes, tired of measuring your worth by results you cannot guarantee. So you opt out emotionally. You lower the bar not because you lack capacity, but because you are tired of pain. But there is another way to live that does not require you to guarantee success in order to move forward. A way that does not tie your value to achievement or your faith to outcomes. When you stop asking, will I succeed? And start asking, will I show up with sincerity? Something shifts, the weight lifts. You are no longer responsible for controlling the future, only for aligning your intentions in the present. The lie of inability thrives when you believe everything depends on you. That if you fail, it is because you were never enough. That if things do not change, it proves something defective within you. But this belief places a burden on the soul it was never designed to carry. You were not created to be the sole architect of your life's results. You were created to strive, to intend, to act with honesty, and then to release what you cannot hold. When you detach your worth from outcomes, the fear around the future loosens its grip. 2026 no longer becomes a verdict on who you are. It becomes a space where you will meet yourself again with whatever strength and weakness you carry at that time. And meeting yourself honestly is not failure. It is courage. You are not able also disguises itself as humility. It says, I know my limits. But true humility does not deny growth. It does not refuse possibility. It simply acknowledges dependence. There is a difference between recognizing that you cannot control everything and concluding that you cannot do anything. One leads to peace, the other leads to paralysis. What if the reason you feel unable is because you have been trying to do everything alone, carrying expectations, healing, success, and purpose all on your own shoulders? No soul was meant to function like that. No heart was meant to be self-sufficient. When you remove the illusion of control, you also remove the pressure that comes with it. You realize that effort does not require certainty, and trust does not require guarantees. Imagine stepping into 2026. Not with confidence in outcomes, but with sincerity in intention. Not saying, this year will be different, but saying, I will be present. Not demanding transformation, but allowing growth. Not proving yourself, but returning to yourself. This is not weakness, this is grounding. And from grounding, movement becomes possible again. The belief that you are not able has kept you safe from disappointment, but it has also kept you distant from meaning. Meaning is not found in success alone. It is found in alignment, in acting from a place that feels honest, even when the results are uncertain. When you live this way, failure does not shatter you, and success does not define you. You do not need to be fearless to move forward. You need to be honest about what you are afraid of. You do not need to be strong all the time. You need to stop confusing vulnerability with incapability. The heart that admits fear is not weak. It is awake. As the future approaches, you will be tempted to measure yourself by timel. Inez, by milestones, by where you think you should be by now. Resist that temptation. Your life is not late. Your growth is not behind. You are not failing because your path looks different. You are learning how to walk it without abandoning yourself. You are not able is a sentence that ends curiosity. It shuts down questions before they are asked. But what if you replaced it with a quieter, braver sentence? I don't know yet. I don't know what 2026 will bring. I don't know how everything will unfold. I don't know who I will become. But not knowing is not the same as not being able. Not knowing is the beginning of trust. And trust is not blind optimism. It is the decision to keep your heart open even when you cannot see the road clearly. It is choosing effort without obsession, hope without attachment, and patience without self-erasure. When you live this way, the future no longer feels like an enemy waiting to expose your weakness. It becomes a space where you will continue to be shaped, refined, softened, strengthened, sometimes all at once. You are not required to arrive in 2026 as a finished version of yourself. You are only required to arrive honest. Honest about your limits, your fears, your intentions, your reliance on something greater than your own understanding. And in that honesty, there is room for grace. There is room for movement. There is room for a version of you that you have not yet met, not because you forced them into existence, but because you allowed yourself to keep walking even when you felt unsure, even when the voice whispered that you were not able, even when the future felt heavy, even when your hands trembled as you reached forward again, even when you doubted your strength but chose not to abandon your soul, even when the path did not promise clarity but asked for sincerity, even when you realized that ability was never about control, but about willingness to stand, to try, to trust, to let go, to begin again without demanding certainty, to breathe into the unknown, to remain present in the unfolding, to accept that becoming is not a straight line, and that the heart does not need permission to hope, only the courage to stay open as it steps into what it cannot yet see. Detachment from outcomes is one of the most difficult lessons the heart must learn, not because it is unnatural, but because the mind and society constantly teach the opposite. From a young age, you are measured by results. You are taught to chase success, to achieve, to prove yourself, to complete, to conquer, to win. Every milestone, every grade, every accolade whispers to you, your worth is determined by what you accomplish. And so the heart, which yearns for peace, finds itself bound to the endless cycle of striving. We are taught to measure life in check marks, in trophies, in numbers, in confirmations. And in this process, we confuse effort with sufficiency, activity with alignment, motion with meaning. But detachment from outcomes is not detachment from action. It is not laziness, indifference, or passivity. It is not giving up. It is instead the subtle and sacred understanding that there are realms in life where your effort is your responsibility, but the result is not. There are moments in life where you can plant, water, and nurture, but the harvest is never fully yours to command. You cannot force growth. You cannot force love. You cannot force understanding. You cannot force trust. And yet, the human heart is conditioned to resist this truth, as though surrendering control equates to surrendering life itself. Detachment is learned slowly, painfully, and often only after repeated experiences of holding tightly and breaking. When we are attached to outcomes, we live as if the world must conform to our expectations for us to feel whole. We measure our days by success or failure, by approval or rejection, by acceptance or denial. Each outcome becomes a verdict on our worth, a judgment on our capacity, a mirror reflecting the inadequacies we feel inside. And so, when life does not deliver according to our desires, our hearts shatter, our minds panic, and we begin to internalize loss as personal deficiency. We forget that some things are never meant to be controlled, and that the natural flow of existence is far beyond human orchestration. To detach is to return to purpose rather than to outcome. It is to plant the seed of intention and then allow it to grow in its own time. It is to act not because you demand a reward, but because the action itself aligns with the truth of who you are. You speak the words even when the other person may never respond. You extend the hand even when it may not be taken. You pursue learning even when recognition is not guaranteed. You continue to strive even when the applause is absent, because the heart that is anchored in purpose, moves from sincerity rather than from fear. Detachment does not remove effort. It removes the obsession over results that blinds you from seeing the present moment. One of the most insidious traps of attachment to outcomes is that it distances you from the process. You become so focused on the destination that you forget the path. The lessons of patience, the teachings hidden in struggle, the moments of small grace, these are overlooked when all energy is consumed by expectation. But the process itself is where growth lives. The act of trying, of failing, of persisting, of learning, of recalibrating, this is the sacred work. Outcomes may reward you externally, but the internal transformation, the shaping of character, the fortification of the soul, the refinement of the heart occurs in the unfolding, not the arrival. Detachment also teaches humility. It reminds you that you are not the sole architect of life. It reminds you that there is a greater order, a larger rhythm, a wisdom that surpasses the mind's calculations. You can plan, you can prepare, you can give your best, but there is a dimension of existence that remains beyond human comprehension, where forces unseen shape paths in ways that reason cannot predict. To acknowledge this is not defeat, it is liberation. It releases the soul from the exhausting tyranny of control and allows it to breathe freely in alignment with the flow of life. Yet detachment is not simple. The mind resists. It whispers that surrender is weakness, that letting go is failure. It reminds you of all the times life did not meet your expectations and cautions you to guard yourself, to anticipate disappointment, to demand certainty before opening your hands again. These whispers are rooted in fear, and fear always tries to anchor itself in the familiar pain, the familiar disappointment, the familiar narrative that says, I must hold on tightly or I will lose. But the heart that learns detachment begins to notice that holding on has never guaranteed security, that grasping tightly at outcomes often leads to more suffering than the results themselves, that the more rigidly you try to control, the more you are tossed by forces beyond your command. Detachment requires trust. Trust in life, trust in purpose, trust in the unfolding of events, and ultimately, trust in yourself. It asks you to believe that your actions have value, even if the world does not recognize them. That your intentions have weight, even if the desired result never manifests. That your sincerity is enough, even if the outcome is not what you imagined. This trust is not blind. It is cultivated through experience, through reflection, and through witnessing the ways in which life has moved beyond your grasp, yet still carried you forward. Over time, you begin to see that life has a pattern, a wisdom, a design that does not always require your control, only your faithful participation. When you detach from outcomes, you also detach from comparison. You are no longer measuring your life against others' milestones, others' successes, others' appearances of perfection. You no longer allow your self-worth to be dictated by standards that were never meant to define you. You begin to see that the unique unfolding of your journey with all its detours, delays, and imperfections is precisely what shapes the depth and beauty of your soul. Comparison is the enemy of presence, and detachment allows the heart to inhabit its own story fully, without envy or judgment. Another profound gift of detachment is resilience. When the heart is no longer bound to specific outcomes, it recovers more easily from disappointment. When expectations collapse, there is still a core stability within, a recognition that your value is not dependent on what happened or didn't happen. This resilience comes not from numbness or avoidance, but from alignment with a deeper sense of truth. That life is dynamic, that change is constant, that loss and gain are intertwined, and that you are never reduced to a single moment, a single event, or a single failure. Detachment also nurtures gratitude. When you are not enslaved to outcomes, you begin to notice what is present. You begin to see the gifts that exist in the here and now, rather than always measuring joy against what could have been. Small mercies, fleeting moments, acts of kindness, glimpses of beauty, they become visible again. The heart learns to receive without demanding, to appreciate without expectation, and to love without possession. In detachment, the richness of life is no longer filtered through scarcity or fear, but through abundance and awareness. Perhaps the most difficult lesson in detachment is that it requires surrender without passivity. You must act fully, intentionally, courageously, yet release attachment to what your actions will yield. This balance is delicate, often confusing, and constantly tested by the human desire for control. Yet it is in this tension that freedom resides. When the heart can act with purpose, but release obsession with results, it experiences a lightness that was previously unimaginable. The burden of constant expectation lifts. The constant self-judgment relaxes. The soul is able to move through life with dignity, grace, and authenticity. Detachment does not negate ambition or desire. You may still dream, plan, and pursue goals. But the measure of your peace is no longer bound to whether these goals are achieved exactly as imagined. You pursue not to validate your worth, but because action itself has intrinsic meaning. You hope not to escape pain or disappointment, but because hope itself is nourishment for the soul. You strive not to command the universe, but to honor your part within it. One of the paradoxes of detachment is that by letting go, you often find that outcomes arrive more easily, more naturally, and more aligned with your true path. The heart that is free from obsession can act creatively, decisively, and with clarity because it is not clouded by fear or desperation. The mind that is not fixated on results can see opportunities that were previously invisible. The spirit that is not burdened by expectation can move fluidly with life's currents rather than fighting them. Ironically, detachment often becomes the pathway to deeper success, not because success is guaranteed, but because the soul has learned to move with wisdom and courage rather than panic and control. Detachment also cultivates patience. When the heart is no longer desperate for immediate confirmation, it learns to inhabit time differently. It understands that growth is gradual, that healing is incremental, that transformation cannot be rushed. You learn to respect the rhythm of life rather than imposing arbitrary deadlines. You understand that meaningful outcomes often require seasons of preparation, reflection, and perseverance. In this patience, you discover a serenity that the mind cannot manufacture through force alone. Ultimately, detachment from outcomes is a return to the essence of the self. It is a reclamation of the inner life from the tyranny of external validation. It allows the heart to align with truth, the soul to rest in trust, and the mind to engage with clarity. You learn that the weight of life is not carried in the result, but in the integrity of your actions, the sincerity of your intentions, and the openness of your heart. As you step into 2026, detachment is the gift that allows you to move forward without fear, to act without obsession, to hope without desperation, and to live fully without the constant judgment of success or failure. It is a practice, a discipline, and a grace. It is the art of balancing effort and surrender, action and acceptance, intention and release. It is not a single moment, but a lifetime of learning, unlearning, and returning to the truth that your worth is never determined solely by what life hands you, but by who you are as you navigate its unfolding. Detachment is freedom. It is peace. It is presence. It is trust. It is courage. It is the understanding that life is far greater than any single outcome, and that the soul's journey is measured not by what is achieved, but by how faithfully and honestly it moves through the unfolding of time. In detachment, you are no longer trapped in fear of failure, nor enslaved by hope of success. You are anchored in purpose, aligned with intention, and free to inhabit the beauty, challenge, and complexity of existence with clarity and grace. Detachment is not the denial of desire, but the recognition that desire need not dominate the soul. You may still long, aspire, and dream, but those longings no longer define the measure of your peace. You may still plan, act, and pursue, but the results are not the chains that bind your worth. You may still hope, pray, and strive, but the outcome is not the verdict on your value. Detachment allows you to hold all these things lightly, to act fully without collapse under the weight of expectation, and to live authentically without obsession with the future. It is, in essence, a return to freedom. The freedom to love without needing reciprocation, to serve without needing recognition, to speak without needing approval, to act without needing guarantee, to hope without needing certainty. It is the freedom to inhabit the soul fully, here and now, with courage, integrity, and grace, knowing that life's unfolding is not a punishment, nor a test, nor a trap, but a sacred space in which you are invited to move, to grow, to learn, and to become who you were always meant to be.